Does Jeffery Simmons want out? The Tennessee Titans star set the record straight on Monday. I'm going to break it all down on today's edition of Locked On Titans.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode, we're going to talk about the fake drama with Jeffery Simmons on Monday, but ultimately discuss what it would look like if Simmons was traded. We'll also talk about what happens next for the Tennessee Titans in their general manager search as they have completed the first round of interviews. And finally, speaking of interviews, Ran Carthon sat down with a local radio station. I'm going to go over everything you need to know from that interview. Before we dive into all of it, I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen each and every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round, always for free. You're not going to beat that anywhere else. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. And speaking of every day, shout out to my everydayers out there tuning in Monday through Friday. Couldn't do it without you guys. And if you aren't an everydayer, you need to be one, because there's going to be Titans news dropping any day now with second interview candidates. They're going to hire somebody. We got a big offseason ahead, and you don't want to miss any of the daily Tennessee Titans content that I'm bringing you here on the Locked On Titans podcast. But with that being said, again, the question is, does Jeffery Simmons want out? Why were people asking this question? Well, got social media drama once again, which is becoming all too common with current professional athletes. But hey, it's really all of us at the end of the day, right? But there was a tweet that said we need to start. It was a Patriots fan that said we need to start the Mike Vrabel era by trading for Jeffery Simmons. Jeffery Simmons liked the tweet. So, of course, that set everybody into a tither. Does Jeffery Simmons want out of Tennessee? Does Jeffery Simmons want to be traded? Is that what's going on here? Is that what we can glean from this? And look, the answer is obviously Jeffery Simmons isn't going to let the organization know that he wants to be traded based on liking a tweet. And Jeffery Simmons came out himself and said after the internet was set ablaze, quote, liking that tweet was literally not on purpose. Y'all cool out. It's not that deep. I know where my heart at. My goal is to retire a Titan, back to enjoying my offseason. Peace sign. So look, does Jeffery Simmons want out? No. Jeffery Simmons said that is not what is happening here. But I do have a couple of things to say about this situation. Jeffery Simmons didn't like that tweet by accident. You don't have a random Patriots fan in his algorithm where he's liking tweets. People do this. He searched his name, and one of the top tweets of his name was a Patriots fan saying, we need to trade for Jeffery Simmons. Now, look, to me, he liked it on purpose, but it's not as a means to say, I want traded, I want out of Tennessee. It's just somebody saying, hey, I think we should trade for Jeffery Simmons, a.k.a. I think Jeffery Simmons is a great player. And he liked it. It's a complimentary tweet. So I don't buy that he liked it by accident and he didn't mean to. It wasn't on purpose. I think he meant to like the tweet, but I don't think that it means that he wants to be traded to the Patriots and he wants to be traded to New England. Now, of course, a bunch of people started with the doom casting like Titans fans are doing nowadays because, hey, it's been a rough go for us. But why would he, want to stay? Of course he wants out. This is a clown organization. He's a winning player. He wants to win. Of course he wants to be traded. This and that, blah, blah, blah. He even had somebody say, heck, I want out too. That was hilarious. But I think the reality here is that the Patriots just went 4-13. It's not like the Patriots are some great organization right now. Yes, they've won a bunch of titles with Tom Brady, but the Patriots aren't good right now. They weren't good last year either. It's not like Jeffery Simmons is trying to go to the Chiefs or something like that. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me to take the angle of, oh, he wants out because the Titans are a bad team. Well, the Patriots aren't a very good team right now either, even though they just hired Mike Vrabel. And obviously that is really what this comes down to. Jeffery Simmons probably really liked Mike Vrabel. That was the first and only NFL coach that he's ever had up until this season. He probably had a strong relationship with Mike Vrabel. They went to a lot of important games and won important games with Mike Vrabel. So, of course, Simmons probably just likes Mike Vrabel, saw a tweet saying, hey, trade for Jeffery Simmons. Said, oh, yeah, thanks, man. Boom. Like, him trying to spin it like he didn't do it on purpose, that is interesting. But here's the reality. I say that a lot. Here's the reality, because it is the reality. The Titans do have to at least have conversations about trading Jeffery Simmons. The report we got from the Titans when they fired Ran Carthon is that the team was going to go in a little bit of a different direction, that they really want to get as many draft picks as possible and really try to draft and develop. That was what we got in the reports when Ran Carthon was fired. So if the Titans truly are going to take their medicine, understand that they're not a good football team right now, and try to get as many draft picks as possible and collect as many young players as possible, well, where does Jeffery Simmons fit in all of that? I have said consistently that Jeffery Simmons is the kind of guy that you build a defense around. But by the time that the Tennessee Titans develop all those draft picks and find a quarterback and make the roster a contending roster, is Jeffery Simmons going to be Jeffery Simmons anymore? Is Jeffery Simmons at 29, 30 years old going to be the player that the Titans need him to be? Does he want to spend the next 3 years of his career as part of a rebuild? I don't know. So while it's all, he washed it away, nonsense. Of course he doesn't want out. That's not what he's saying. That's not what he means. That's not what he said. That is what he said. While that is the case right now, if you're the Titans and you know that you're not going to be good for a couple of years, would you consider trading Jeffery Simmons to a contending team? Think about a team like the Green Bay Packers. The Packers could use some additional pass rush. During the trade deadline conversations, there were Packers fans who said that they were interested in Jeffery Simmons. Maybe the Patriots want to get in on this. But I think for Jeffery Simmons, I would need at least a late round first plus a mid-round pick. And if it was an early second round pick, like from the Patriots or a bad team or something like that, then I would want an early second round pick and then 2 mid-round picks for Jeffery Simmons. I mean, Simmons is an all-pro level player when he's at his best. I think that matters. Now, I know that there are negative Nancys who are just immediately going to be like, Jeffery Simmons ain't worth that. Well, yes, he is. Yes, he is. So I think that the Titans could collect a lot of important draft capital. And during the season, I said, you don't trade Jeffery Simmons in season because that's out of desperation. A lot of teams don't have the ability to acquire Jeffery Simmons because he makes so much money. It's difficult to do in season for teams. During the all season is when those conversations deserve to happen. And a year ago, a year and a half ago, 6 months ago, I would have told you, and I did tell you, I'm totally out on trading Jeffery Simmons in any way for any reason. He's the type of guy you build a defense around, and he is. But by the time that the team is built up enough to be competitive, I don't know that Jeffery Simmons is going to be in his prime and worth the contract that he's getting. So for the betterment of Jeffery Simmons and the betterment of the Tennessee Titans, they at least need to have conversations about trading him, whether he wants out or doesn't want out or whatever. Anyways, this team needs to really look in the mirror and have a lot of hard conversations about where they're going. And Simmons as a trade option absolutely is one of those conversations that has to be had. But second round of GM interviews coming up next. We'll break it down. Before I do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. There's no waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantee. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about the Jeffery Simmons drama on Monday, but now I want to move on to the big news that we got late in the afternoon. The Tennessee Titans have taken the next step in their general manager search. They have completed their first round of interviews, and now they are moving forward to their second round and going with their candidates that are the finalists. I'm going to tell you who's been announced so far, what I think about these guys, and also reiterate once again why it's so important for the Titans to do this quickly, and it looks like that's exactly what they're doing. Before we dive in, I do want to thank you again for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. It's your team every day. But the Titans finished up their first round of interviews on Monday with John Eric Sullivan from the Green Bay Packers, my top candidate on the list. But quickly on Monday night, after they completed their first round of interviews, they went forward to identify the finalist for the job. Now, I expect that there could be more names that come out even after this, but at some point the show has to come out. I tell you guys all the time that this time of year I live in fear because I figure that news will break at any moment to ruin the updatedness of the show that I release. So there may be some more names. Tomorrow, I'm going to spend time really ranking the names, who I like the best out of what's come out throughout the news cycle. But so far, we know 5 candidates are coming back for a second interview. We start with my number 2 candidate and a member of my hype tier, Mike Borgonzi from the Kansas City Chiefs. He's the assistant general manager there. 16 years of work in Kansas City. He's been a director of player personnel, been a director of football operations, heavily involved in the scouting side of the football operation, which is obviously something the Tennessee Titans told us publicly they were looking for, someone who has a real strong sense of projecting players from college into the NFL. Not a lot of teams in the NFL have been better at drafting and developing over recent years than Kansas City. Obviously, people talk about Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is a key to their success, but they've done a really good job building their roster through the draft as well, while having high-priced players like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill when they still had him, and Chris Jones on the defensive side. They've done an excellent job in Kansas City. And as a matter of fact, Mike Borgonzi is the guy who negotiated the L'Jarius Sneed trade with Chad Brinker. Those two were the key contact points for that trade. Now, it doesn't mean they, no, I won't do that. I'm hanging up if I don't get it. It doesn't mean that they personally were the guys who negotiated the trade, but they were the people making contact from the two franchises while the trade was going down. So obviously there's a relationship there with Mike Borgonzi. Maybe they got along very well during that time period of contact, and that greased the skids for them to be able to hire Borgonzi. I have stated skepticism that Mike Borgonzi would be available to the Titans because the Titans GM job is so murky in its actual power structure. I don't know if a guy like Borgonzi, who's a highly sought after candidate, would prefer a different option other than that. But the Jets and the Raiders, not very stable organizations either. So maybe that kind of cancels out that concern. But Borgonzi will be a second interview for the Tennessee Titans. Ian Cunningham, a guy that I liked more than Ran Carthon in 2023, Chicago Bears assistant general manager. He was, again, a finalist for the Tennessee Titans general manager job in 2023 when Ran Carthon got it. He's going to get a second interview for the Tennessee Titans. I'm a bit worried about Cunningham and his experience with the Bears. It's another organization that's not super stable. And look, we're hearing that the NFL approved the Titans general manager job, which means that they do see it. The Titans sold it as the top football executive in the organization, which, again, what the heck does that mean when Chad Brinker has final say over the roster if he's not the highest football executive? And it doesn't really make any sense whatsoever. But if that's the case, then you need somebody from a stable organization who knows how things are done well. And the Bears organization is weird with Kevin Warren, kind of in a Chad Brinker role, honestly. And I just don't know if we want to take somebody from that regime right now. I think Ian Cunningham is a great candidate, but you just wonder, it's like basketball teams that tank, you know what I mean? And then 3 years down the road, they got some better players, but they have terrible habits because they were trying to lose. And now they can't get out of the hole that they dug. I just worry about what being with the Bears for too long could mean for Cunningham going forward. But also, second interview with Terrence Gray. Terrence Gray, one of my favorite candidates, a part of my hype tier, scouting expert out of Buffalo. Obviously, Buffalo has a really good roster, and in recent years, they've really flexed that muscle with some of the guys that they've drafted over going out and spending, which they tried to do for a while. They got rid of Stephon Diggs and relied on their draft and relied on, getting a crew of wide receivers in there that are cheaper. They get the trade for Amari Cooper that was not that expensive at all. But I think the way that Buffalo has built their team, obviously they have Josh Allen. And, I would like to go get a guy who is a part of the project to get Josh Allen. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you're going to find Josh Allen all over again or anything like that, but you want to take people from good organizations who understand the way things are done well and follow that path. So I like Terrence Gray, college expert, 11 years as a scout in Minnesota. I think that makes a ton of sense for the Titans. Also, we have John Spytek from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another guy who was in my hype tier. He's currently the vice president of player personnel, assistant general manager. Sometimes they share these titles. Came up from director of player personnel in Tampa Bay. Another guy who is a scouting expert. Okay. He was a college scout. He was a pro scout back when I was in high school. You know what I mean? 15 years ago. He rose to be a director of college scouting, a national scout. He's done everything on the college scouting side that you could imagine. So for that reason, I think he would be an excellent fit for the Tennessee Titans. So we got 3 guys here in my hype tier, and that's out of the 5 that they've announced already, or probably have already announced more. Obviously, I'll rank all of them on tomorrow's show, like I was saying, hoping John Eric Sullivan gets a bring back. But maybe that was I think with the John Eric Sullivan thing and it being last and it being on Monday, it could have been that he wanted to wait until the game was over. The Packers played the Eagles. Chad Brinker is a guy who knows him well. They worked together for 13 years. He probably said, hey, man, let me do it after the weekend. I want to be focused on the game, with the organization. Just boom. So I'm figuring that's why it was on Monday. But it also could be John Eric Sullivan knows that he's not taking the job with the Titans. And Chad Brinker is a potential friend who, again, worked with him for 13 years. You develop friendships with people. As a friend, say, hey, I'll interview you. Let me do a little prep interview. And then next year, when you go to actually be serious about taking a new job, you have a little bit of experience, just a friendly gesture, I guess, a professional courtesy, you could call it. That could be a possibility as well. But we will see. We'll have, the clearer picture because these second interviews are going to take place later in the week. But the last guy who got a second interview so far is Ed Dodds, who's the assistant general manager for the Indianapolis Colts. He came up as a scout for the Seattle Seahawks. I talked about Ed Dodds, and my only concern there is, and look, I've said this before, and I'll say it a million times, just because your boss does something doesn't mean that you agree with everything they say or do. You know what I mean? You haven't agreed unilaterally with every boss you've ever had in your life. If you've ever worked at any kind of jobs or multiple jobs, like it's not like every action your boss takes you are on board with. There are things that Ed Dodds probably would have done different than Chris Ballard if he had been in control. But the conservative nature of the Indianapolis Colts franchise scares me. I don't want the Titans to get that conservative. Maybe this offseason they were too aggressive with the money in the free agency, but I'd like a happy medium than the team that does absolutely nothing all the time. So I'm worried about how on board Dodds is with the philosophy of Chris Ballard, because I think Chris Ballard is incredibly overrated. I think the Colts would have been better off firing him this offseason if they could, even though he's a good drafting general manager. But how much is Dodds involved in the free agency, the draft? It's an interesting question. But those are the 5 candidates so far at this time that have had requested interviews for the Tennessee Titans. Again, I'm going to rank all of them that have been announced on tomorrow's show. But right now, we need to talk about the Titans' former GM, who did a very rare, I would say, you don't see this happen very often, but did an interview with a local Nashville radio station for an hour on Monday and said a whole lot of nothing, but I'm going to break down everything that he actually did say. Do want to let you guys know, though, that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement were unforgettable, and the ticket buying process to go on Game Time was unforgettable as well. Now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets to your favorite live events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for tickets for an upcoming concert on the Game Time app, and with Game Time Picks, I found an amazing deal. I even got a panoramic view from my seat, so I knew what I would be looking at, and the app has an all-in pricing feature to show you the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. We talked about the Jeffery Simmons drama on Monday morning, which has been resolved, but only sort of going forward. Talked about the Titans general manager search and where it's at right now and what comes next. But now I want to talk about this interview with Ran Carthon. Again, very strange to see a general manager get fired and then a couple of days later go on local radio. I think what happened here is Ran Carthon is close friends with Ramon Foster, who is one of the hosts of Ramon, Kayla, and Will, which is where the interview took place on 104.5 The Zone in Nashville. I got to tell you, though, you didn't miss anything if you missed this interview. And I hate to be rude. I'm not trying to do this in any way to, like, hurt the station or anything. I don't care about that. But there truly is no reason for you to go back and watch this interview. It was softball after softball for Ran Carthon. Was not asked any of the tough questions that we wanted to know the answers to. A couple of things stood out to me. Literally, he was on the radio station for an hour. And I have two sentences that even stood out to me as anything that could be interpreted as a shot at somebody or an explanation even. So I'm going to go through that right now. So one of the big things I wanted to hear Ran Carthon respond to was the personal stuff. You know, he's sleeping on the plane. People didn't think he worked very hard. There were people in the building that didn't buy into his relationship guy thing. They didn't really buy it. And Ran said, quote, "I take issue with the personal stuff. If I don't know them personally, I shrug it off. Negative things said about me from the start, I don't give it credence." He said he, could give it two craps or whatever about people who don't know him personally, taking these shots at him. He basically saying, like, how would they know? You know what I mean? So that's interesting right there. And obviously, Paul Kaharski wrote the article saying that he was sleeping on the plane and insinuating that, he was people thought he was lazy, I guess, or things like that. That is the picture that was painted, quite honestly. And Chad Brinker saying we want a GM that's all ball all day, eat, sleeps. Like, they really tried to paint this as Ran Carthon didn't work hard enough. So that was his response to that. I think it was a professional and smart way of Ran to dismiss it as a thing, but not add fuel to the fire. You know what I mean? And not bring more people into it and all that. Just, hey, I hate the personal stuff. Don't attack me personally if you don't know me. But also, if you don't know me, why would I care what you had to say? So that's probably the best way that you could play it. Ran Carthon did say that when he started talking about why he got fired. He said, quote, "Relationships matter. People have to trust you at all levels of the building." And I think that quote right there really tells us what we need to know. Now, I'm not going to pretend like Ran Carthon meant to send this like subtle hidden message in this. But I think what we could read into that is Chad Brinker had a better relationship with Amy Adams Strunk. So when crap hit the fan, she went with the person she had a better relationship with. And I think also the report that we saw that said not everybody in the building was in love with Ran Carthon's relationship guy, persona. Excuse me. And I think that shows you that maybe there are some people in the building who Ran Carthon was never able to establish a good relationship with. And when you're in a Game of Thrones snake behind your back whisper environment, if you don't have enough strong enough relationships to have people defend you and protect you when you're not in those whisper conversations, well, then you'll probably fall to the sword. And that's what happened with Ran Carthon. So I thought the relationships matter. People have to trust you at all levels of the building. That was like the only spicy thing that was said. Outside of that, Ran Carthon said he wasn't surprised by being fired because in this league, you're judged by wins and losses. He has a lot of people in his life who he knows who have been fired or whatever, and they're good at their jobs, but, it's just wins and losses. It's a production business. So he did say that. He did thank the fan base, the players, the coaches. He really expressed heavy, heavy belief in Brian Callahan. He said he really believes in Brian Callahan. And on Will Levis, he actually said, quote, Will's going to be fine. And he talked about how he's been in 4 different offenses in 4 straight seasons, a different offense every year. So he defended Brian Callahan, who he hired. He defended Will Levis, who he drafted. So no surprise there. Duh. They asked him what he would do with the first pick if he was still the Titans general manager, which I thought was kind of rude. But whatever, you don't know the relationships with the people in there. And he said, I'd draft a good player, as a joke. That was fun. But he also did say that Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward, he both thinks they're capable, quote unquote, capable of being NFL starters. So they spent a lot of time talking about music. I agreed with him on a lot of his takes about music, but I didn't come there to listen to Ran Carthon's opinions on music. So, here is the last thing that really stood out in a big way to me is there was no mention whatsoever of Chad Brinker and Amy Adams Strunk. Now, some people are saying, oh, he signed a non-disclosure agreement. He can't. Most of these big-time contracts have some sort of NDA involved, but it's not an NDA that says you're not allowed to mention Chad Brinker or Amy Adams Strunk ever again. Here's what my real take on the interview was at the end of the day. It was boring. It didn't give us really anything whatsoever, except for the couple of things I mentioned at the beginning. But it could have been so much better. Again, nothing but softball questions. And I think here's a reality. Ran Carthon never would have agreed to do that interview if he thought he was going to get hammered with hard questions. He just wouldn't have done it in the first place if that was the case. But I think, and I also know that, Ran Carthon isn't going to go trash the organization because owners talk. And if he trashed the Titans organization on his way out the door, he has less of a chance of getting hired by somebody new. Because what owner is going to have somebody who's going to trash him if they fire him? That's just bad business. Don't burn a bridge. Don't create a public stake. All of that. I get that. But there is somewhere in between. There's somewhere in between grilling Ran Carthon for the real answers and what happened on Monday. There's a middle ground where we get a little bit of clarity. We get some truth. To not even mention Chad Brinker or Amy Adams Strunk, we got nothing out of this. Literally nothing. So I just want to say that while I didn't expect Ran Carthon to go out there and trash everybody and light the place on fire on his way out the door, there was a middle ground where the interview could have given us a little bit more. It was a complete waste of time at the end of the day. But with that being said, that's why you come to me, so I can save you time and break these things down. But that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. As always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed. This was Locked On Titans.